Have you ever heard of the lottery curse? Winning the lottery is just about the luckiest thing that can happen to someone, but for many, it's followed by running out of all the luck they thought they had. That's pretty much what happened with Jack Whittaker, a West Virginian man who won a whopping $314 million. This man rapidly became the perfect example of the so-called lottery curse, making him wish he had never won in the first place. Here's how it all went down. Jack Whittaker was born in a small rural town named Jumping Branch in West Virginia in 1947. He lived a modest, religious life growing up. By the time he was an adult, he had become a very successful businessman. Jack may have always had luck on his side. He rose up the ranks of the construction company he worked at, Diversified Enterprises Construction. By the time he was 43, he had become the company's president. By 2002, Jack was completely loaded by all means. He had a net worth of over $12 million. And of course, you had to be super lucky to make it this far, even with hard work. That's why in the same year, Jack Whittaker decided to try out his luck again. He wasn't a gambler by any means, but he noticed that the Powerball jackpot had reached insane highs, $314 million to be exact, which, in comparison to today's huge billion-dollar jackpots, might seem quite low. Anyways, there was no chance he wasn't going to at least try winning the whole thing. So that day, on Christmas Eve 2002, Jack purchased over $100 of Powerball tickets. It was pretty much chump change for a guy as rich as him, but that was about to turn into one of the biggest investments he had ever made. The following day, it was Christmas. As usual, Jack spent the time with his family, helping his granddaughter open presents, and just appreciating the life he had worked so hard to build for himself. Although this day was a bit different for him, since he had something else to look forward to. The Christmas Powerball draw. It was 11 p.m., and he and his family had tuned into Channel 3 Charleston, where they announced the winning numbers for the huge lottery jackpot. Funny enough, he fell asleep before the numbers were actually said. Suddenly, he was abruptly woken up by his wife, Jewel. She told him that 4 numbers on one of his tickets matched the 5 numbers shown on TV. Jack had no idea what that meant, but he assumed he won around 100 grand, maybe 200 grand. But whatever it was, it had to be big, right? With that in mind, Jack went to bed, thinking it would be better to find out the next morning. However, he unexpectedly woke up at 5 a.m. and decided to turn on the TV. To his surprise, he discovered that the winning ticket was sold at the C&L SuperServe in West Virginia. What are the odds? That's the same place where I purchased my ticket, he thought to himself. Then the broadcast repeated the numbers one more time. Apparently, they had said the wrong numbers in the previous broadcast. Jack grabbed his ticket one more time and quickly realized all of his 5 numbers matched the winning numbers. He had just become the biggest Powerball jackpot winner in history, the winner of an undivided $314 million jackpot, which turned into $113 million after tax and chose the lump sum payment. Still, a pretty big check if you ask me. After his wife, the first person Jack told about the win was the cashier he bought the ticket from. He went to the store and handed her a bill. When she saw it was $100, she immediately knew. "Did you win?" she asked. Jack simply grinned and nodded. The cashier later said she just remembered how happy he seemed at the moment. Jack saw his victory as a Christmas miracle, a gift from God himself, so he decided to use his new money for good. He vowed to donate at least 10% of his earnings to build new churches and contribute to the pastors who helped his family the most when they needed it. He also planned to create a charity that helped West Virginians in need. A strong plan that, in addition to the size of the jackpot, brought Jack a lot of media attention. However, his southern charm turned him into a hero of sorts. He had rapidly become an overnight celebrity. All this was pretty new to his family as well. His wife was pretty shy about the whole thing and didn't really like all the media attention. Despite being married to a multi-millionaire, she preferred living a more low-key life. For example, she preferred cleaning their house and taking care of things herself. The money didn't really mean anything to her since they were already pretty wealthy. However, she was pretty happy seeing it meant something to her husband. Unlike her grandmother, Jack's teenage granddaughter, Brandy Bragg, was clear about what she wanted. Brandy was extremely close to Jack. They were practically best friends. So, when Jack became a celebrity, Brandy saw the opportunity to get things she always wanted. This is important, since later we'll see how much trouble that meant. Anyways, among the things she desperately wanted was to meet her favorite rapper, Nelly, and to get her favorite car, a Mitsubishi Eclipse. Jack saw no problem in this, since he wanted the women in his family to enjoy his now bigger fortune however they wanted. He made it clear he was all for the girls. More importantly, Jack wanted to become a role model with his massive win. More specifically, he wanted to set an example of what people should do when they get an incredible amount of money. After all, he had a pretty humble upbringing, and before his huge win, he was already pretty well on his feet. Until then. His now more than $120 million fortune started to take a toll on his personality, and Jack began to change. The constant media attention, the knowledge that he can burn through 99% of his wealth and still be insanely wealthy, and the power that came with this, led to Jack becoming a bit careless, to say the least. On New Year's Eve, Jack went to his favorite pub. He walked up to the bar and, in an act of, let's call it generosity, slapped $50,000 in cash on the counter. He wanted everything, not just for himself though, but for everyone present. The bar owner, who knew Jack well, immediately knew he was playing a dangerous game. He said his biggest fear was waking up the next morning and reading Jack Whittaker found dead at the Pink Pony in the newspaper. After all, it was dangerous and reckless to be flashing so much money. By the night's end, Jack was so drunk he couldn't drive home, so he called for a ride. Not a normal taxi though, a limousine to be precise. After all, passing out in a limo is better than passing out in a normal cab, right? The next morning started like any other morning for Jack. He went to the C&L Super Serve to buy some coffee and biscuits, as he did almost every day. However, that day there was something different. Some of Jack's fans, who heard about his intentions to give away most of his money, knew that Jack would be there. As soon as he arrived at the Super Serve, he was bombarded by dozens of people, waiting for hours. Some of them had driven across state lines, and others came all the way from Israel, all of them with one thing in common: a problem or two that they needed help with. Anywhere from terminal cancer patients to homeless and unemployed people, Jack saw it all. Nonetheless, he would regularly give these people money, but it started being too much at one point. He quickly became overwhelmed and stopped visiting the convenience store soon after. That didn't stop his fans, though. They would regularly show up at his house and office, call his phone, and practically follow him wherever he went. If Jack refused to give someone money, he would sometimes get threatened, which obviously was less than ideal. Things got so bad that the Putnam County Sheriff's Department started providing Jack with personal security 24/7. During an interview, he told reporters he feared his life would never be normal again. Spoiler alert, it wouldn't. Maybe it was the pressure of his new identity, but Jack continued to go on a spree of generosity. Remember that convenience store clerk who Jack gave $100? Well, he bought her a brand new house for over $100,000 and handed her a check for exactly $44 grand. She didn't know why he picked that specific number, but she was too stunned to ask. In all honesty, I think she was the real winner in this story. At the same time, Jack bought a very expensive Lamborghini and drove it around his neighborhood, throwing thousands of dollars out the window at some houses. At least, that's what people said. But as you're about to see, this was only the beginning of how everything turned south. Like the story so far? And go ahead and subscribe for more lottery stories gone wrong just like this one. His spending habits were notoriously getting from bad to worse. It all reached a breaking point when the lottery winner decided to hit up the Tri-State Racetrack and Gaming Center in Kanawha County. This was a gambling mecca, and Jack wanted to impress everyone with how much money he had, especially the ladies. His wife, Jewel, wasn't with him, so Jack bought drinks for pretty much every pretty lady he saw that day. Of course, he also had a lot to drink himself. The drunker Jack got, the more abrasive his behavior turned. At the gambling hall, Jack started to get a bit too close to the women he was continuously buying drinks for. According to reports, numerous women said he had touched them inappropriately, and multiple lawsuits were filed that day. However, none of them went too far. It's assumed Jack settled all of them. After winning the lottery, Jack also started frequenting another place to have fun, a strip club a few miles away from his house. To no one's surprise, he became the most coveted client, as he was famous for being the best tipper. So, whenever he walked into the room, all the attention was on him. Nonetheless, Jack would often try to seduce or impress some of the women by telling them how much money he was carrying at that moment. I know, stupid mistake. One night, he told one of the strippers he had a briefcase in his car with over $500,000 in $100 bills. And as you can imagine, by the time he was ready to go home, he found his car had been broken into, and the loaded briefcase was nowhere to be found. When police asked Jack why on earth he was carrying around such a ridiculous amount of cash, left it in the car, and out of all places, at a strip club, he simply replied, "Because I can." While the $500,000 may not have meant much to Jack, the loss in public goodwill hurt him the most. Most locals knew Jack as a happy, Christian family man who promised to spend his money serving God. And while he, indeed, has helped several foundations, he was rapidly exposed as having visited the strip club numerous times. Believe me, he wasn't there to spread God's message. The image he was crafting for himself was starting to fall apart. Several months later, the charity Jack had set up to help West Virginians in need was shut down because it was overwhelmed by the number of requests it received. It couldn't handle them anymore, nor they have the funds to do so. Now, not only did Jack lose his family man image, but he was also starting to lose his philanthropic image. He had been so busy with work and partnership proposals that he barely had time to spend with his family anymore. He was busier than ever before. At this time, his granddaughter Brandy, which I've mentioned before, was going through something very similar. She rapidly lost friends because she simply couldn't keep up with all the money requests. You can imagine how tough this was for a 17-year-old girl in high school. Despite that, Brandy was still Jack's closest family member, even more than his wife. He and Jewel had only one daughter, Ginger, who was suffering from lymphoma and couldn't really look after Brandy, even though she wanted to. On the other hand, Brandy's father took his own life due to clinical depression shortly after she was born. So for the most part, Jack was the only father figure Brandy ever knew. Continuing with the madness, people say she was given a $5,000 allowance every time she went to school. Of course, everyone knew about how insanely rich she was now, especially because she frequently bought expensive gifts for the boys she liked. One day, all this attention backfired when 3 of Brandy's friends showed up outside Jack's house and smashed through his car, stealing a bag with $100,000 in the process. At this point, it was starting to feel like the money was a curse, and everything worsened. Pretty much every boy would try to win Brandy's attention since it meant they'd get nice and expensive gifts. Eventually, Brandy fell for Jesse Tribble, an 18-year-old kid from school. The two had a rocky relationship from the beginning, to say the least. Their relationship was built around money and drugs, which led nowhere but bad. After a couple of months, the relationship would meet a tragic ending when in September 2004, Jesse was found dead inside Jack's home. Apparently, he had overdosed on numerous heavy drugs. A lot of the blame went to Brandy, since her friends claimed that she was the only one with enough money to buy these kind of drugs in heavy amounts. A lot of hatred and resentment started to build around Brandy, which was brutal for her. 3 months after her boyfriend's death, Brandy was reported missing after visiting a friend's house. Police questioned everyone and looked for Brandy for several days with no luck until the case took a turn. Unfortunately, police found her body but couldn't determine the cause of death. However, drugs were still in her system, according to forensic reports. This caused Jack to completely go on a downward spiral. He strongly believed that someone had murdered his granddaughter, but the most likely culprit was probably his own money. That's at least what Jack's wife said. Jewel claimed that the Powerball money had completely destroyed her family and their lives. Her husband was constantly flirting and sometimes harassing women. Her granddaughter was gone, and it all started when Jack won the lottery. Brandy's funeral occurred on Christmas Eve of 2004, 2 short years after Jack won the Powerball jackpot. After Brandy's death, things were never going to be the same for Jack, and he went down a path of alcoholism and recklessness. He had numerous DUI charges, and throughout this whole time, the only public statements he gave were while drunk, in which he continuously blamed everyone for his granddaughter's death. As you can imagine, Jack was pretty much burning through his money at this point. He had an expensive drinking habit, accompanied by visits to the strip club, where he spent thousands of dollars almost every day. If that wasn't enough, he frequently spent tons of money fixing his cars, or buying them, since it was common for him to drink and drive, which led to several accidents. It's fair to say that he became someone very different from the successful businessman he was before winning the lottery. In his company, it was becoming really hard to see him around. He was no longer involved in his business as he once was, and his primary way of making money at this point was gambling whatever he had left. I'm pretty sure he lost more than he won. In addition to all this craziness, lawsuits were also piling up against Jack. He had multiple cases of sexual harassment, fraud, deception, and much more. He was more likely to settle most of these lawsuits while burning millions. To make matters worse, according to legal files from 2007, a group of 12 thieves gained access to Jack's checkbooks and withdrew millions, reducing his fortune to just a fraction of what it once was. Shortly after this, his wife Jewel filed for divorce after being married for 42 years, giving him the final blow to go completely broke. But something worse was yet to happen. By now, Jack considered himself retired, so barely any money was coming his way. In 2009, his 42-year-old daughter passed away, likely due to complications related to her disease. From that point forward, Jack tried to stay out of trouble and live a normal life. However, in 2016, further tragedy struck when his house burned down completely. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but the place was deemed a total loss since it wasn't insured. It was simply one thing after another, following a series of bad decisions. Long before he passed away at the age of 73, Jack Whittaker had grown bitter about his jackpot win. In multiple interviews, he expressed regret about having claimed the winning ticket. In an interview with ABC News, he claimed that his enormous riches had forced him to give up everything that truly mattered to him, and that he didn't like the man he had become. Jack eventually passed away from a long illness on June 27, 2020. Now, even the scraps of the 2002 prize are a source of legal contention and squabbling, with everyone trying to come away with something. It's less money, but it still brings more problems. This story truly looks like the perfect example of the so-called lottery curse.